Hello and welcome. Good afternoon to everybody who is here and is watching us live at our first event of the year for this webinar series. It is called Protests in American History, and we are going to be having this series of this throughout the year. Take a moment if you can and look at the live Q&A, and you can download the PDF that's there and see the other protests in U.S. history webinars that we're doing in October and November. And I would like to just take a moment here to thank Misty Wilson from the Connect Campus for helping organize this, and Connect Campus for their support. We're really honored to begin this series today. And this is going to continue going throughout the year. You'll see the fall dates, but there will be spring dates as well. I'm Chloe Northrup, and I'm a professor of history at the Northeast campus. And today our theme for our first Protest in U.S. History series is on Hispanic Heritage Month. And this series arose this summer when Misty Wilson came up with this idea of looking at different protests in U.S. history, particularly in the light of protests that are raging around our nation currently. I hope that these events can be placed in a larger historical context through these events this year. And so, like I said, the focus for this first event is Hispanic Heritage Month. This month is going to range from September 15 to October 15, and it began in 1968 under Lyndon Baines Johnson as Hispanic Heritage Week. And then it was expanded in 1988 under Ronald Reagan to Hispanic Heritage Month. Within this 30-day period lies the anniversary of independence for many Latin American countries, including Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And September 16 is the Independence Day of Chile, and that's near and dear to my heart because that is where my mother grew up. And September 18 is this Independence Day of Mexico, where my mother spent many formative years. So we are so excited to learn a lot today from these different speakers. We're going to begin with Dr. Garrison Henderson, who is a professor of sociology at the Southeast campus. He got his Bachelor's of Science in Criminal Justice and Sociology and his Master of Science in Interdisciplinary Studies. He then got his Doctor of Education at Texas A&M Commerce. He has taught at TCC now for 16 years in a lot of different aspects of sociology. We're really excited to hear his talk today. Our second speaker is going to be Dr. Peter Martinez from the Northeast campus. He was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and he earned both his bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Texas at Arlington before receiving his doctorate at the University of North Texas, where we attended classes together. As an undergraduate student, he was awarded Best Undergraduate Paper in Political Science for a paper entitled The Underrepresentation of Hispanics in Congress. He then received his PhD, where he is going to received the Best Dissertation in Tejano Studies by the National Association for Chicana and Chicano Studies, TEJAFOCO, in 2018. And he is an associate professor now at the Northeast campus. And finally, we have Armando Villarreal from South Campus, who is an associate professor of U.S. history. And he specializes in U.S. history from 1830 to 1860 and the Cold War. He has taught many different classes, and he is a father of 6 children. He is also a former rancher and a farmer. And his hobbies include raising meat cows, hunting, and fishing. So I'm really excited to welcome these 3 speakers today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of them. So our first speaker is going to be Dr. Garrison Henderson. So everyone clap to your screen as we hear this first talk. Thank you so much. Garrison, you need to unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Garrison Henderson, and we will launch right into this. My brief talk is going to be about the theory of collective behavior. Collective behavior encompasses social movements, collective gatherings, and as a subsequent result, social change, or at least attempted social change. So let's just launch into it. So a working definition of collective behavior is collective behavior, first of all, is not likened to with the study of groups. A contrast is made between collective behavior and organizational behavior. Whereas organizational behavior is guided by a specified set of rules and parameters, collective behavior or behaviors are not undergirded by established cultural practices. So in a sense, when we're speaking collective behavior in the sense of social movements, we're speaking a group of folks that are, if you would, pushing the envelope. They're pushing the envelope. Robert E. Park, sociologist, he's actually accredited. By the way, he was a faculty member at the University of Chicago. And that's the birthplace of American-based sociology. But he's credited as the actual founder of collective behavior as a field of study. However, there are earlier accounts of collective behavior, such as English scholar Charles Mackay in 1841 in his book entitled Memoirs of the Extraordinary Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. And I'll come back to that note in just a second, the idea of madness. Gustave Le Bon, 1891, suggested the mind of the crowd took over, whether in a mob, in a French chamber of deputies, or in an entire nation. People acted destructive under the influence of uninhibited instincts. So the earlier conceptualizations of collective behavior is that the belief is that they were irrational. They were irrational in nature. Collective behavior is rooted in the anti-democratic theorists of the 19th century, Europe. And one of the most fundamental and perhaps maybe the most paramount bias is the implication that collective behavior is some sort of irrational act in nature. And when you see what's going on now, all the protests that are taking place, it seems to have this built-in bias that people or groups of people are irrational in nature. We don't understand what all the fuss is about. And the focus tends to be on the negative behavior, not so much as the cause, the reasoning, the rationale. Those things seem to be kind of ignored. Now, characteristics of collective behavior. You have emergent norms. In other words, when you get into a collective gathering, it is well noted that sometimes simultaneous, emergent, and spontaneous behavior take place. And this is simultaneously in collective gatherings. So it's very hard to suggest that when you have a social movement, everybody is on the same page, and people may have different reasons for attending a gathering. And that's always been the case. No social movement is exempted from this. You can lay it all out. I can say Me Too movement. I can say civil rights movement. I can say Chicano movement. I can say the Million Man March. I can go on and on and on. Every social movement, you have several different, of course, you have your primary cause, but you have people, the attendees, that are there for a variation of reasons. Some are positive, some are a variation of the primary, and some are just there for the sake of being around people. Feelings move into actions. With every social movement, just about, there seems to be a discrepancy with the current reality and the expected direction. And it's a gap between the two. Essentially, this is what is the building block of the cause itself. It seems to be a discrepancy between those two. And we want that discrepancy to come closer together. That's generally the goal of most social movements. And then you have forming and sustaining collectivities. And I'll come back to that one, which brings me to this slide here. These are the ingredients of forming and sustaining collective gatherings. You have a significant event that takes place, whether it's something related to the criminal justice system, whether it's something related to the healthcare system, or one of the other institutions, like, for example, employment versus unemployment. Any of the institutions, it may be education. But I have to say, perhaps in current society, probably the most paramount social institution of concern is probably the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system, along with education and employment. And healthcare is in there as well. But I would say from a minority perspective, I would say the criminal justice is probably the most paramount. So you have a significant event that takes place in any one of those areas. And then you have that plus the availability of pre-existing social groupings. When you put those two together, those are the building blocks of forming and sustaining collective gatherings. That's all it takes. That's what ignites the wheel. That's what starts that train going. When you have those two things that take place, and when you add them up in the totality, that's when collective gatherings are actually formulated and developed, and sometimes they mature and sometimes they die out. Now, the traits of collective behavior, according to Carl MacPhail, you have two or more persons. Oftentimes, it's many more. We speak in hundreds, thousands, sometimes even millions. Engaged in one or more behaviors. And the behavior is judged to be either common or it's judged to be concerted. I'll elaborate on that more so in just a second. And then you have one or more different dimensions, like the velocity, the tempo of the group, the formation of the group or the gathering. Okay, so you have some traits that are interesting. You have orientation. That would be how a group is clustered. How they actually, are they gazing? Are they facing each other? Is it more of a visual? And then you have your vocalization, people being vocal. That would be if are they laughing? Are they wailing? Are they hissing? Are they whistling? Are they booing? Are they yelling? And then you have your collective verbalization. Verbalization would be chanting. Do you hear chants? You know, Black Lives Matter. Okay. I can't think. Trayvon Martin. You know, are they chanting something like that? Are they singing, praying, reciting, or pledging? And then we go to manipulation. That would be applauding. That would be like synchro clapping. One person does this and the other person goes, you know, are you in sync? All these are characteristics of the orientation involved in collective gatherings. One of my personal favorites is the gesticulation. That involves like certain salutes. Like, for example, one paramount, and you may see it on some of the slides, is the Black Power salute. That's an example of a gesticulation. It's a certain, or something like this here. All these are symbolic of certain gestures that are very, very, very common during selective gatherings, collective gatherings, and social movements. Okay, judge to be common. Okay, now when we see behaviors in a collective gathering, behaviors that are in sync, behaviors that are kind of the same. You know, if they are marching 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and everybody is doing the same thing, an outside observer would look at that and judge that as just common behavior. Common behavior. Okay? Now, collective, on the other hand, collective behavior in concert is a little different. These are behaviors that are engaged in that are different. However, the behaviors mesh together. So you have person A that may engage in behavior A, and you have person B that may engage in behavior B. But however, those two behaviors, although they're different, they complement each other. That's an example of collective behavior in concert. I'll go back to Black Lives Matter. You may say, somebody may say, Black lives, and somebody over here may say matter, even though they're saying different things, but it goes together. That's an example of behaviors that are in concert with each other. Okay, now there are some misconceptions about collective behavior, and it's about 5 of them that I want to highlight real quickly. You have one misconception is that every member is the same. Every member is the same. In fact, every attendee that's there is on the same accord with everybody there. That is almost an extreme misconception. During some of the protests, one of the things that were pulled out of some of the protests was the idea that how many have heard the idea of looting? There were individuals looting, tearing up property and things like that, and those things do occur. But we have to be fair about this. The truth of the matter, based on research, people that engage in social movements in terms of tearing up property and being violent, that's actually rare. We are more likely to experience violence at a sporting event than we are a protest rally. And that's based on research. Okay, now sequence is the same. You have simultaneous different behaviors at the same gathering. So sequence is not the same. Collective behavior is simplistic. No, gatherings, especially when you get into hundreds and thousands, is a very high level of complexity. Frequently involves conflict. And now when I mean by conflict, I'm speaking violence. I will reiterate what I said a second ago. Most social movements are not violent. Now, could a combustible mix take place? Yes, but isn't that true with all gatherings? So protest marches and social movements are no different in that regard. Movements continue indefinitely. There is a misconception that when we have a social movement, it's going to last forever. And the reality of it is it does not. Because what is contingent upon just as much are the factors related to allocation of resources, the interests, the demand in society at that time. So those are some of the highlights of misconceptions related to social movements and collective behaviors. Now, a few examples. You had the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, Civil Rights movement, feminist movement. Feminist movement, there were 3 waves of the feminist movement. You had the first wave where women spoke out against one institution, the institution of slavery and voting rights. And then you had the second wave. Now that wave there in the late 60s and the 70s was much more global. And that was in conjunction to the civil rights, and it was commonly referred to as women's lib. Then you had the Million Man March in '95. That one was interesting, about self-help of Black men. And then now I will say this here. The Me Too movement about women speaking out against sexual abuse and sexual assault That's actually changed to some degree. You have some elements, or it's created somewhat of a ripple effect. In other words, some distant cousins of concern with the Me Too movement is spilled over into sexual harassment. Even though that's not sexual assault, it's still in that same, it's still along those same ideas. So when you have a movement, it can change channels, it can create ripple effects, and it can go further than what was actually intended. Now, everybody, unfortunately, do not support these movements up here. I would like to tell you that everybody support them, but that's just not the reality of it. I will share this with you real quick. During the civil rights movement, what was interesting in now we talk a lot about how Dr. King was assassinated, but let me just share with you a little known fact. June 30th of 1974, there was an African-American male by the name of Marcus Chenault. He was actually in church where Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. was preaching. And Alberta King, Dr. King's mother, now this is 6 years after Martin King Jr. was actually assassinated. This guy rose up after Alberta King had finished playing the organ in church, and he shot her, and he killed Dr. Martin Luther King's Jr. mother, June 30th, 1974. And when they interviewed him, they asked him why he did that. He said he was actually targeting Martin King Sr. because he felt like Black leaders were misguiding the Black community. Little known fact. This is June 30, 1974. So that's just a small example of how when you have social movements, it's good for everybody to support them, but the reality of it is people on different pages. We're doing good if we get the majority to support it. And unfortunately, we live in such a complex society with different ideologies, different perspectives. You're gonna have people on the same and different pages simultaneously. And those are my references, and I will stop right there.
Just a quick thing while Peter is getting going. Remember to go over to the live event Q&A if you have any questions for the different speakers, and post your question and it could get answered at the end. And our next speaker is Dr. Peter Martinez.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Or is it morning, afternoon? Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I'm in my bedroom. I feel like I just woke up. All right, I am speaking today about the Los Angeles Blowouts, these student walkouts in 1968 Los Angeles, a major mark during the Chicano movement, and we'll hear a little bit more about the Chicano movement right after me. But let's go ahead and start today with these preconditions for these protests, these landmark and very influential protests of in Los Angeles, California in March of 1968. Let me just check something real quick. Okay. All right, so let's look at these. These are going to be some of these preconditions for these protests rising up. We're going to have a very unhappy student body. We'll mention one teacher in particular who will play a role in these protests as we go into March of 1968, a very young man. Youth is really going to be the power in this movement, as it was for a lot of the civil rights movements of the 1960s and late 1950s. But dropout rates are going to be one of the big issues. Now, the schools that we're looking at are going to be majority Chicano populations, and I'll explain that term Chicano in just a minute. But Chicano is going to be this phrase that we use for Mexican Americans. That's the preferred term of this youth movement in the 1960s and 1970s. Not quite as popular today as it was back in those days. But there's going to be 5 schools in particular that'll be involved. These five schools are all around 75% to 90% Mexican American populations. Lincoln High School had over 90%, for example. In the Los Angeles School District, we had around 130,000 Chicanos just in that district. Now keep in mind, Los Angeles has the highest Mexican American population or Chicano population in the United States at that time and now, right? So Los Angeles is a huge city with a very large Mexican population. The dropout rates for Chicano students at this point going into 1968 tended to hover around 40 to 50%. One school in particular, Garfield High School, had a 57% dropout rate for Mexican American students, 57%. Now, I can give a lot of history behind this. I'll just mention something real quick. I've done research myself on 1920s Fort Worth, and there was a document, or I'm sorry, there was a publication by the Fort Worth Independent School District right around 1925 or 26 that talked about that the real goal of the education of the Mexican student in Fort Worth was to get them to a 3rd grade education. That's the stated goal, is to get them up to 3rd grade in the 1920s and 1930s. You just want to get them to the point where they can read, write a little bit, and they'll go do some farm work, right? That's going to be the idea of education for Mexicans when we're talking about the 1920s, 30s, and you still have a lot of that residual effect going in the 1950s and 60s. And some could argue today that maybe some of that's still around, but that's a different conversation. So dropout rates are extremely high for Mexican American students. We had these other education issues. Mexican students or Chicano students tended to be guided into vocational training. No knock on vocational training. I know a couple of my friends that I went to high school with, one of them did drop out of high school, are doing fantastic economically as plumbers, right? You can make a killing as plumbers, but you're not going to have that political leadership. You're not going to go to Harvard or Yale or even UT in a graduate school, going through these vocational schools. And that's really where education's gearing these Mexican students in the 1960s. And again, you're going to see that, even beyond the 1960s, but really big time in 1968. In fact, in the Los Angeles School District, only 1 out of every 1,000 Mexican students actually obtained a college degree in the 1960s. 1 out of 1,000, not 1%, but 0.1% of Mexican students actually obtained a college degree. And again, that's all this representative of what education is like in Los Angeles and elsewhere. Los Angeles is not the exception. There are segregated schools or Mexican schools that have been built up. Again, kind of going back to Fort Worth. Fort Worth has had 2 separate Mexican schools in Fort Worth history. So this is not unusual whatsoever. Now, there's also concerns about administration. Oh, I'm sorry. One other thing about education. In lower grades, a lot of these Chicano children, these Mexican American children, were not allowed to speak Spanish. And if you spoke Spanish in school, you could be spanked. So it's pretty often you'll have the corporal punishment for speaking Spanish when you're at school. So what you're going to wind up seeing is segregated children, silenced children, right? If Spanish is the language that you really know, and you're going to be segregated, there's not going to be much attention paid to your education. And the teacher's not going to pay much attention to you, right? You have that communication gap that's just not going to be bridged in the 1960s. So we're looking for teachers that can really work with those Mexican children or Chicano children. We're looking for administrators. There's no administrators at all, right? We have thousands and thousands of Mexicano or Chicano children in Los Angeles, no administrators at all in the Los Angeles School District. And this is all going to be part of a Chicano movement that we're going to hear a little bit more about from Professor Villarreal in just a few minutes. So I'm going to let him expand on that, but I will mention the term Chicano, where it comes from. We know that Mexico, when we're looking at Mexican history, the name Mexico comes from the Mexica people. The Mexica people created the Aztec Empire, and the Spanish come and conquer the Aztec Empire with Hernan Cortes. And essentially what we're doing when we're using the term Mexica, we're going to turn the word, of course, Mexica is going to be the basis for the country name of Mexico. If we pronounce it in Spanish, it's Mexico. If we pronounce it in English, it's Mexico. We're not going to use Spanish or English. We're going to use Mexica, because Mexica is taking back our Aztec power and our Aztec pride. So by using Mexica, we are saying that we are not Mexican, we are not Spanish, we are not Anglo. We are part of this Aztec race that's powerful and used to have this empire, and it was excelled in mathematics and art and everything else, right? We have this cultural pride that we're all adhering to. Now, going back to some of these educational issues, I'm going to point out this woman over here, Paula Crisostomo. She was a Lincoln High School senior who helped lead these walkouts at this point. She was arrested during this occasion. I'll give you a quote that she had when she was in Lincoln High School. She asked a question to a teacher in geometry class, and her teacher responded by saying, quote, "Oh, Paula, why are you bothering? We all know you're not going to college. You're going to be pregnant by the end of summer like the rest of your girlfriends," end quote. So that's her response when she's just asking for clarification on a geometry question, right? That's what she's looking at. That's what we're looking at. I'm going to mention a couple other guys that we're going to mention that are part of this movement. This gentleman to the left, Harry Gamboa Jr., is a well-noted photography and performance artist. When he was in elementary school, and you can look him up pretty easily, it's very easy to find Harry Gamboa if you just Google him. But a teacher brought him up to the front of the classroom when he was in elementary school. They made him a hat out of construction paper, and then on the hat they wrote the word Spanish. And they told him, "You're not allowed to take off that hat until you can learn to speak English." So they're bringing this little kid up to the front of the class and telling him, "We're going to put this on you, label you, and basically make you a pariah until you can learn to talk with the rest of us," right? Really encouraging educational growth for Harry Gamboa Jr., who's had a fantastic career as an adult. And then Moctezuma Esparza is going to be a leading member of this as well. Moctezuma Esparza was, he wound up not only graduating high school, but he went on to UCLA, graduated from the University of California at Los Angeles. He worked in Sesame Street shortly after graduating from UCLA. On Sesame Street, he helped create bilingual education skits using the, everybody knows Sesame Street, right? But that bilingual education is really going to come off of Esparza. He gets into the film industry, and he produced a number of films, including a movie called Gettysburg that starred Martin Sheen, Tom Berenger, and Stephen Lang in the early 1990s. Later on, he did a movie called Selena, which I think a lot of you are probably familiar with, starring Jennifer Lopez in the late 1990s. And then in 2006, he did an HBO movie entitled Walkouts, which is based upon this exact movement. Of course, he was a key role in that. Walkout stars Michael Pena, and I'm sure most of you know Michael Pena from Ant-Man and about 100 other movies, right? So we'll move on to the next one. Now, going into 1966, we're going to see a rise of this organization here, Young Citizens for Community Action. Now, they will change their name to Young Chicanos. It should be Chicanos plural, my bad. Young Chicanos for Community Action in 1967, and to join together, they started wearing these common brown berets. This is going to be a symbol of kind of their unification, their uniform, their militarism. So these brown berets are going to build off of the Young Chicano for Community Action organization in 1967. Late in 1967. One of the leaders of this organization, a man named David Sanchez. Sanchez is depicted right over here. Of course, you can see the older picture of him up top. The gentleman second to the left, that is David Sanchez. Sanchez was 17 years old at this time, 17. He's 17 years old. He wants to get involved in organizing and improving the environment and success rate for his fellow classmates, right? He's 17 years old. So he wrote a grant proposal to the Southern California Council of Churches. They granted him money, and he bought a coffee shop. This coffee shop is called La Piranha Coffee Shop. This coffee shop is going to be a place where Chicano youth can meet following school to stay off the street, stay out of trouble, and then communicate and organize. And they're going to invite various speakers to their events. So amongst those who attended and spoke at La Piranha was a man named Reyes Lopez Tijerina, Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. I believe the next speaker is going to talk about both of them, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, we can always answer questions afterwards if you want to know more. I'm not going to expand further on those two guys, but we may hear more. And Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, who was a significant leader in the Black Power movement in the mid-1960s as well. So all these guys are coming and basically teaching these students on how to raise up your community, how to grab power, how to organize, how to communicate. All of that is being taught by these people who have been doing it for a long time, who are very effective. And one guy that's going to be instrumental in this is a guy named Sal Castro. Sal Castro is this gentleman over here. He was a teacher. He taught at Belmont High School. That's one of the schools that's going to be involved in this. In fact, I believe, well, I'm going to come back to the school map in just a moment, but he's going to be involved as a teacher. He's only like 20, he turned 24, I believe, during the school year. So he's a young guy that's going to be leading these 17, 18-year-old kids, and they are going to threaten to walk out, and eventually they will walk out during the first week of March. Right off the bat, you have around 10,000 students walking out of school because they want these demands to be met, and the school administration is not meeting them. And of course, when students walk out of school and don't show up, a lack of bodies in the classroom means a lack of money for the schools. So when you have 10,000 students on a daily basis leaving school, that's money that the school district is losing. Now, within a week, we have upwards to 22,000, at least 15,000, but some estimates put it up to 22,000 students are all walking out of these high schools in Los Angeles, primarily East Los Angeles. And these are some of the demands that they're pushing for, right? They want classes in Mexican American history. By the way, I'm teaching in Mexican American history at class, and you can thank those classes to this movement right here. We have bilingual education opportunities, right? That's going to be a big deal because, again, the Spanish-speaking students aren't having many opportunities at this point. We have administrators and teachers who show prejudice should be removed. Again, this will be decided by a citizens review board, so it's not just automatically, I'm angry at that teacher, we're going to get rid of them. No, they actually have to go through a hearing, so they acknowledge that. They want more Latino teachers hired. Now, that's an issue today, big time. That's an issue. And the Fort Worth, the Fort Worth too, but the Los Angeles School District today is somewhere around 90% Latin American or Chicano. It's a very high percentage, and I believe it's like 37% are teachers. So it's still an issue today to that representation in the classroom. So they want to hire more Latino teachers. And they also want administrators to be of Mexican descent as well if they work at these various schools that have high Mexican populations. Here's one particular image of the walkout. Now, the walkout didn't just include high school kids. It also included a lot of parents and a lot of their little siblings, right? You see like older men, you see women, you see little kids, and this is a family effort. It's not just rebellious kids saying, I'm not going to go to school unless they treat me better. This is the environment, the community coming together all at one time saying, this has to stop, right? We have to have a better education. We have to have a better future. Now, in response, after that first day when you had 10,000 students walking out around March 5th, going into March 6th, we have a really big police presence response. You can see this high school student was struck on the head with one of those little nightsticks. You can see videos of kids being thrown around and hit on the ground. It's a very violent affair, but the issue that the Mexican Americans or the Chicanos had in Los Angeles versus some other movements is they didn't get the media attention. All right, this is all going on in March of 1968, right after the Tet Offensive and going into the 1968 presidential election. So very few people are seeing what's going on here. When Martin Luther King Jr. and African Americans in Alabama are being sprayed down by water hoses and dogs are biting them, everybody's seeing this on TV, right? You see this mass outcry for what's going on in the South. This is all kind of being hidden, right? The news isn't really reporting this very much, but if you're in Los Angeles, you know this is going on. Now, here's a map of where the schools were. Wilson High School, Lincoln High School, Roosevelt High School, Garfield High School, and Belmont. And La Piranha Cafe is down here to the bottom right, not too far away from Garfield High School. So this will just give you kind of a depiction of where these schools were located. Now, after about 2 weeks of walkouts, the students finally go back. They're allowed to present their case to the school board on March 28th of 1968. And basically the school board says, no, 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 no. They don't give the students anything that they want to do. They won't commit to the extra teachers. As I mentioned, even today, we're only at 37% of Mexican-American or Chicano teachers. The school board is basically going to blow them off. They're not going to do much to help out these students, not right away anyways. The teachers, I'll give you an example of a teacher response. One teacher named Richard Davis at Lincoln High School said the following, I'm going to quote him. Most of the Mexican Americans have never had it so good. Before the Spanish came, he was an Indian grubbing in the soil, and after the Spanish came, he was a slave. It seems to me that America must be a very desirable place. Witness the number of wetbacks and migrants, both legal and illegal, from Mexico. When it comes to going to school, free and the best in the world, the Mexican American is passive. Absenteeism is his culture, his way of life. Always mañana, maybe he'll get an education. Mañana. When it comes to repairing his home, controlling childbirth, planning for tomorrow, he is passive, end quote. So that's a teacher's response after the school board says, no, we don't need to do anything to fix the problems that Mexican Americans are having in the Los Angeles School District. We'll keep teachers just like that. So it looks like a defeat, right? It looks like maybe they didn't get what they wanted to get. But what you wind up seeing is this massive community response. You have this awareness, this cultural pride, this power that comes out of this. So even though the district doesn't do what the Chicano activists wanted them to do, you see the community rise up and you see these students really say, this is our opportunity to shine. A year after this happened, the Mexican American or Chicano attendance at the University of California in Los Angeles rose from 100 to 1,900 Mexican American students, from 100 one year to almost 2,000 the next year following these walkouts. Furthermore, that Brown Beret movement expanded, so there were 29 Brown Beret chapters across the country, including chapters in San Antonio, Texas, and Denver, Colorado, two other key areas of the Chicano movement that I think may be discussed in just a few minutes. And finally, the national response, we have this widespread Chicano movement that continues on into the early 1970s. Again, a lot of the Mexican American education and cultural understanding that we have today is a result of this movement. That will conclude my section, and we'll move on to Mr. Villarreal.
Okay, that was very good, Peter. Very enjoyed your talk, and I like Garrison's too. What I'm gonna try and do is I'm gonna tie both of these in together, and they're gonna tie in nicely. I guess it was just happenstance that that I was at the end. One of the things I want to say before I get going is that there has been a resurgence in the Brown Beret movement, and recently I was inducted. So I am a member of the Brown Berets, and they are a colorful group. I'm very proud to be there. They kind of look to me as like a mentor, you know, but you touched on some things that we definitely need to touch on. So am I in control of the slides? Or next slide, please, I guess. All right. As it was mentioned before by Garrison and Peter, social movements are not cohesive. A lot of people think that they're these homogenous movements that move together flawlessly, and they're not. They're actually, there's actually movements within these movements. And a lot of times, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but the government itself will get individuals from the movement to infiltrate the movements and to fragment them. And that's one of the things that happened to the Chicano movement. We'll talk about that in a minute. Prior movements to the Chicano movements, we have something called social banditry, where you have men like Pancho Villa and you have men like Gregorio Cortés and Emiliano Zapata that are fighting against injustices. You know, Pancho Villa was upset because two Spanish guys raped his sisters. Zapata did it because of land issues. And we'll see that. The other thing that we're going to see is the emergence of mutual aid societies that is going to lead to things like American GI Forum and LULAC. Okay, for those of you that don't know what a mutual aid society is, basically a bunch of Mexican Americans, and I use Mexican American, brown people, and Mexican interchangeably. Okay, I know it irritates a lot of people, but I still do it. These individuals would get together and collect money, and when somebody passed away, they could draw on that. That is something that we call now a tanda. That's what it's at. Now, the first really big movement that we see, and I had done some changes to the slides, but I'm going to cover her at the end, was Emma Tenayuca, but unfortunately the slide is at the end, so we'll talk about it. But the first organized, really card-carrying one was organized by Hector Garcia. And Hector Garcia was actually a doctor. He joined the military, and when he joined the military, he told them in the military, hey, you can send me to the front, but I'm a doctor. I'll be better use of you as a doctor. And they didn't believe him. They made him produce his credentials. So after he was in the Army, he created the American GI Forum. And the American GI Forum eventually is going to lead to the forming of LULAC. And what Garcia said is that the only way that Mexican Americans are going to get ahead is if we get an education. As Peter had said before, you may think that 0.1% is too much, is a little. I think we're up to about maybe 0.6 right now. And really what's graduating more, for every one brown person that graduates with a degree, 6 brown ladies graduate with a degree. So our problem with graduation is that we don't have enough males to graduate. And that's our problem. I think PhDs, I think we're 0.04 of brown people that hold a PhD. That includes Puerto Ricans and Cubans. Okay, that's Latinos. Dr. Hector Garcia was really famous for the Longoria case. Felix Longoria was a soldier that went to the Pacific and he got killed. And when his remains were sent back to Three Rivers, Texas, they would not hold the wake in the funeral home. They said, you got to have it like in the patio outside. And he basically used all of the political might that he had to contact LBJ and win that case. Now, Felix Longoria eventually gets buried at Arlington National Cemetery, but what good is that to the family if the family doesn't have money to go, visit his tomb? I mean, what you have here is that you have Mexican American males that are going to war and fighting, and then they can't come back to the United States and be buried with everybody else or eat a hamburger. I remember my dad, when he came back from Vietnam one time, he told me, I went to I came in through South Carolina and I went to have a hamburger, and they told me, you so-and-so, you don't eat in the parlor, you have to eat outside, and it's just, my dad had just come back from Vietnam. He was twice decorated with Bronze Stars, and they're telling him he's got to eat outside. There's some problems there. Now, what Garcia did is that he focused on the desegregation of schools, because he felt that if we desegregated schools, then we can produce doctors, we can produce more Peter Martinez's, and we can produce more Garrison Hendersons. And even at this time, one of the things that we haven't mentioned is that women like Chloe and Misty didn't have the same opportunity. Okay, I always like to add to my students that women at this time were also marginalized. And I always tell my students, if you're a brown female, you are marginalized because you're a female, then you're marginalized because you are brown, and then if you happen to be gay, then you're marginalized because you're gay. So you have 3 strikes against you before you even get started. The next slide, please. Now, the beginning of multifaceted movements begins in the 1960s, okay? As Peter said, and it happens in the 60s, and it gets lost in the Vietnam War. Okay, it's that simple as that. the Mexican Americans owe the president that the Mexican Americans owe the most to is Lyndon Baines Johnson. And during his career, he worked in Cotula and he saw the poverty. Now, let me tell you something. You know, LBJ would throw around racial epithets like there was no other, but he understood the plight of brown people and black people. You know, he understood that they needed help, and he did it. Now, one of the things that we have to see is that these movements are multifaceted. When we talk about Corky Gonzalez, Rey Lopez Tijerina, and Cesar Chavez, they were not all on the same page. Cesar Chavez was looking for justice for grape pickers in Delano, California. Okay. They wanted better wages and better working conditions. Now, when I'm talking about better working conditions, I'm talking about not being sprayed with DDT while they were picking grapes. Okay. So what he does is that he starts a collective movement, a strike movement, to have these grapes and crops rot on the vine. Now, what doesn't help Chavez is that there is a very large Asian population in California. So these strikes were a lot longer than the walkouts at school. I mean, some of these were 2 and 3 years long. I remember as a child going to the grocery store at HEB in South Texas, in Laredo, because I'm from Laredo and Pete's from San Anto. And, you know, they would give my mom a little paper and it'd say, don't buy grapes. And my mom would say, mijito, we're not going to get any grapes today because they're not being nice to Mexican people. And my mom would say, I would say, well, Mom, we're Mexican people. Why are you saying it like that? And she wouldn't explain any further. Now, the one thing that Chavez did, it was peaceful protest, and he also did a hunger strike that was incredibly effective. And they also did a lot of marching. Now, I'm not talking like marching downtown. I'm talking about 100-mile marches, okay? They would march from different migrant villages into Sacramento, into Delano, wherever it is to meet with the governor. Now, one of the things that I will tell you is that Chavez was never really on board with the other movements. And despite being a lone movement, it is more successful than all the other contemporary movements because Chavez is able to capitalize economically and start institutions. Like, let's say, for example, when Mexican Americans that were migrant workers under him would try to buy a house and they wouldn't let them, what Chavez would do is that he would start a savings savings and loan company, a credit union. That's what I was looking for. They would pool their money there and they would buy a tract of land, lend themselves the money at a lower rate, and then lend money to other people at a higher rate. When they needed power, instead of getting it from California, they would buy it from Mexico. You see, that's why he's able to do so much, and that's why he's so effective. And the other thing, they liked him because he was peaceful. He was a very quiet man. I was very fortunate to be around him for about a week before he passed away. A former girlfriend of mine was an understudy of him. He was a very quiet man. He spoke very little. He was just an individual that when he spoke, things happened. Okay. And I'm going to tie back to Chavez in a little bit. Can we go to the next slide? The first really militant Mexican-American civil rights activist that we have is Rey Lopez Tijerina. I mean, this individual, I went to where he was born. I was very fortunate to meet him too and listen to a couple of his lectures. And he focused on New Mexico, okay? And what he wanted is that what happened in 1848 after the U.S.-Mexican War, a lot of the land grants titles were lost. And he said, since these were never like officially taken away from us, they still belong to us. And he argued this before the courts, and the court says, yeah, if you can produce these legal claims, we will give you back this land. Now, what happens with him is that he becomes frustrated because of the lack of this documentation, because of the amount of time that expired. You're looking at 300 or 500 years. he was very bold and fiery, and I mean, even when I listened to him when he was older, I would shirk because he was incredibly vitriolic. I mean, this guy would hold nothing back. I mean, he will let you know that Anglo-Americans were the bad people. And it's as simple as that, you know. I'll never forget one of the talks that I went to. He said, "Is everybody here willing to fight for the cause?" Yeah, we all said, "Yeah." Is everybody here willing to die for the cause? And well, not so many people said yes. And then he said, "Well, how many here are willing to kill for the cause?" And some people went like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, those of you that are willing to kill the ones that aren't willing to die." And I'm like, okay, you know. So he used that as an example. Okay. Now, his claim to fame is when he raids the courthouse because he was told he couldn't have a protest, and he actually takes the district attorney hostage, and some deputies are shot. Okay. At this time, you can see how Cesar Chavez is not going to associate with somebody like Reyes Lopez Tijerina, okay? He would be seen as a liability. That doesn't mean that Reyes Lopez Tijerina or King Tiger was not necessary at the time. You know, he was necessary, just like Stokely Carmichael was necessary, like Malcolm X was necessary, and I would say even like Marcus Garvey was necessary. You know, he was an attention getter, a violent movement that garnered spiritual support, but no direct funding. Nobody was going to directly connect himself with him. Now, after being jailed, he comes out, and in fear of retaliation, he moves to Mexico, and he fades away into relative obscurity until, you know, maybe like the 1990s. He comes back when Jose Angel Gutierrez starts to do some writing on him. I like him because he needed to be where he needed to be. I kind of consider him like the Marcus Garvey of the Mexican American movement. And like I said, he was very in your face. Now, I don't like to bring out dirty laundry, but one of the other reasons that people move away from him is it is my understanding that he got married with a really young girl, and it was seen as a no-no. So, you know, and this is coming from listening to other civil rights leaders. By the way, all of the ones that I have presented to you, with the exception of Hector Garcia and Emma Tenayuca, I have either studied under or listened to. Next slide, please. Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez is, in my opinion, is all of greatness. What Corky had in know-how is what Reyes Lopez Tijerina lacked. And what Reyes Lopez Tijerina had in vitriol is what Corky lacked. In other words, there's going to be a Corky and a Reyes Lopez Tijerina in a little bit. He was a local organizer in Colorado. He was a boxer, and that's how he got people to listen to him. He was a political organizer, a poet. He was from Denver, Colorado, and he starts a crusade for justice. And he focused on general civil rights and equal representation. He said, if we can get equal representation, let's start grassroots, then we can move up. It's kind of a lot like what the Black Panthers do with self-education. That's what he starts to do. He starts one of the first Chicano youth organizations, Chicano Liberation Conference, and what he does is that he wants to unite the gangs. He says, how can we expect other people to respect us when we're sitting here killing each other? When they get together, they have a conference and they draft a plan, a constitution, El Plan Espiritual de Aztlán. And my students they're made to read it when I teach the second half of Mexican American history. And a lot of it is redundant, but it focuses on pro-indigenous. Like Peter was saying also, I'll tell you real quick, about 10 years ago, I went to the doctor because I was having some trouble with my hands, and I got my hands x-rayed, and the doctor said, were you ever hit with a straight edge of a ruler on the top of your knuckles? And I said, yes, I went to a Catholic school, and whenever I spoke Spanish, they would put the nun would put my hands on the desk, and they would get the ruler, and the ruler has that little metal thing, and they would smack me with it because I wasn't supposed to speak Spanish. Now I was very thick-headed, so I would just speak Spanish, right? And he says, you've got bone chips there from that. So what Peter is saying is true. Being put in a corner, having to wear some type of dunce hat, and the wealthier Mexican American kids being made fun of because I would bring my bean tacos, which I still love. Those things happen. Those things happen. And what he does in this Plan Espiritual de Astran is like, look, there was, when I was growing up in the 80s, the word Mexican was a bad word. There's nothing bad about saying Mexican. There's nothing wrong about saying I'm a brown person. That's what I am. So what he wants to do is that he wants to promote pro-indigenous ideas and revolutionary ideas. And we pose the question of Mexican Americans or mestizos. We are product of the conquest. So we are caught in a dichotomy of, are we Spanish or are we indigenous? And that's a conversation for another day. Okay. So what happens is that eventually Corky gets together with Jose Angel Gutierrez, and they're going to have the first Chicano moratorium. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about this now. And then when I talk about Jose Angel, there's a falling out at the moratorium because they can't agree who's going to lead. And they found La Raza Unida Party, and they actually get somebody to run for governor in Texas, Ramsey Muñiz. But the problem is that there was no cohesive union in there, and I'm going to tell you what's going to break it apart. Okay, now what he does and what Jose Angel has done, and I'll tell you when I get to Jose Angel, is that they never really leave the picture. They just step back into the crowd, away from the crowd, and start doing their work. Next slide, please. Jose Angel Gutierrez is my favorite. I studied under him for a long time. I am very proud to say that he is my friend. Drank a lot of wine at his house and talked a lot. And sometimes people will tell me, people that are opponents of Mexican American programs will tell me, well, how do you know he meant that? Well, that's because he told me. End of story. You know what I mean? He was born in Crystal City. His father was a doctor. His father died suddenly, and now he realized what it was really like. He worked in the fields in Crystal City, otherwise known as Cristal. And 90% of the students at Crystal City High School were Mexican American, yet no Hispanic cheerleaders were on the cheer squad, okay? No elected officials in Crystal City. Now, here's what happens. He gets elected for student council, and there is no changes at that time. He goes to school, his Texas A&M at Kingsville, and he gets a bachelor's in political science. And then he goes to St. Mary's and gets a master's in political science there. And then he goes back to Crystal City and he helps with these walkouts. And unlike the walkouts that Peter was talking about, he uses the approach of the way that he gets the parents involved, because he would go talk to the parents and he would tell the fathers, you know, they don't let your kids on the cheer squad. There's none of us kids on student council. And the parents were, the male parents were passive and would say, well, no, go talk to the vieja because, you know, I don't want to get involved in that. And then he would tell the parents, no, the reason that they don't want your daughter on the cheer squad is because she's ugly. You can't tell a parent that, you know what I mean? That's how he was able to get him involved. Now, his walkouts were effective because it's the same thing that Peter said. They lose money, okay? But he went bigger. As he started these walkouts, they also did a takeover of politics in Crystal City. And then eventually what happens is that they lose power the next election. Why? Because we haven't been there long enough to govern. And a lot of the people that were elected were marginally educated. And that happens a lot to minorities. You get all this power and you either don't know what to do with it or you don't know how to wield it. And we drop the ball. That is something that we need to address. Now, of course, Jose Angel starts a Mexican American youth organization, Mayo, and organizes walkouts, political takeovers, bilingual programs in high school, later on, after Americo Paredes starts the Center of Mexican American Studies, he is the director for the Center of Mexican American Studies at UT Arlington, and that's where I met him. In addition to that, he was an attorney, and he was very controversial, but very effective. Okay. He's the one that came out with a coin "Kill the Gringo" speech. He's the one that would speak vehemently about, Anglo-American birth rates dropping. Uh, he would say, this is what we need to do. But as he retired, he was very, very direct with me. He says, I'm done. I mean, I'll do what I can, but it's time for the next generation to take over. And he and I talked many times that there was not enough of us to, I would never think of filling his shoes, but there's not enough Jose Angel Gutierrez, Peter Martinez's, Garrisons or Chloe's out there to continue this. We need to graduate in record numbers. When I have looked at, when we go to hiring committees, we get a couple of African Americans and a couple of Mexican Americans, and sometimes they're just not qualified, So, in my opinion, next to Emma Tenayuca, he is the most important. And let me tell you why he's the most important. Because he was like a chameleon. He was well educated, okay? And he was also from the barrio. So he was able to move in and out like a chameleon. 1 minute he could be talking with the vatos and doing street, and the next minute he could be talking about writing a grant. He knew when to talk about burning stuff down, and he knew when he had to put a suit and a tie on. And that was very, very effective. Because in today's world, if you're going to lead any movement, you cannot be a liability. And if you are going to be a liability, you've got to have something that's going to balance that liability. Okay? I remember when I was starting the Mexican American history classes at TCC, I had some professors just come right out and tell me, we don't need this. This is America. This is U.S. history. We don't need brown history. We don't need yellow history. We don't need gay history. You can learn that later on. This is at TCC. I had people tell me that. And believe me, there was times that I wanted to come out of my chair, but I knew that if I wanted these programs to be successful, I had to follow I had to follow a certain guideline. Next slide, please. The Emma Tenayuca, in my opinion, was the first, after Gregorio Cortés and Pancho Villa and all them, we have Emma Tenayuca, born in San Antonio. I heard Peter said that he had relatives that knew her. My grandmother heard her speak one time. I think my dad heard her speak one time too. Diminutive lady, very, very impassioned, very fiery. They call him La Apasionada. She was very successful in leading strikes in pecan shelling and cigars. Women, they're very, just like, I tell my wife, can you button my shirt because my fingers are too fat? They used to shell pecans by hand, and they used to roll cigars. And the conditions that they were doing them were, they were sitting in boxes. It was bad for their back. They were breathing pecan dust, all of this. So they went on strike, okay? As she's jailed numerous times, she is very successful in getting raises and, promoting these things. But eventually she realizes that she's not going to get anything done until she gets an education. So what does she do? She moved to California where things are a little bit more liberal. She promotes bilingual education, gets a master's, and targets that books be printed both in English and in Spanish. Okay. And if I am not mistaken, she was also an advisor for a program, the Mexican version of Sesame Street that used to be called Carrascolendas. I'm pretty sure that Peter remembers that, maybe faintly. She was an aspiring activist until her death in 1999. Why is she so important? You don't expect a barely 5 foot, Mexican American woman to be that fiery, to be that in your face. She did get married to an Anglo-American, and she felt that he was holding her down, and she left him. But she always gets left out, and I should have put her at the beginning, so I do apologize to all of you, and I apologize to Emma. Next slide, please. The last one I'm going to cover is Dolores Huerta, and this woman is amazing. I had the pleasure of listening to her talk. She is 90 years old. She worked side by side with Cesar Chavez, but never agreed with him. I actually was able to listen in on an argument between her and Cesar Chavez, and trust me, some of the words that she used, I I wouldn't use. She was a contemporary. I actually believe that she was the backbone of the movimiento. She's the one that comes out with the phrase "si se puede." They were following her. She had the charisma. She had the draw. Uh, Cesar Chavez was more like the patron saint of that movement, and she was the fire, of the movement. Now, one of the reasons that that movement declines is because she falls out of favor with Cesar Chavez, and she starts a community service grassroots movement with voter registration. Okay. The other thing that happens, and like I said, I don't like to talk about this, but it's true, and it'll tell you how one of the things that plagues these movements, and I will tell you in the last concluding slide, is machismo prevails in our culture, and that's what draws women away from our movement. If she didn't like a husband or somebody she was with, she would get rid of him, and she has a good number of children with different men, and this really bothered Cesar Chavez. It was just like, I've had people tell me, this was one of the reasons that Cesar didn't like her, is because, she did what she wanted when she wanted. And that's why she's so incredibly remarkable, because she was not going to fit into the mold of a stereotypical woman, and she was not going to do that. Now, in 1988, when she was already like in her 60s, she gets batoned in Sacramento. I mean, really bad. I've seen the video, a private video of her getting batoned. It's very disturbing. And she was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Barack Obama. And that is truly amazing. In closing, because I'm probably going around time, the Chicano movement was multifaceted. It was not one cohesive unit. When Corky and Jose Angel things didn't work out at the El Paso conference, what didn't hurt is that when the women brought their list of grievances, they said, no, you all need to go cook. Basically, that's what they told them. Jose Angel told me the reason that the movement failed in El Paso, because we marginalized the viejas. And even then he was like, okay. We also have state, local, gender, and interorganizational issues. And we cannot put out that COINTELPRO, the FBI, infiltrated the Brown Power movement, the Black Power movement, and the Chicano movement. There was people within the movement that were doing their best to take it apart, okay? Now, a lot of these leaders, well, they have to grow up. They have to earn a degree. They have to raise their families, right? So they go to work. And the vitriol gets old, okay? After a while, in your face, violence tactics will grow old. You have to learn again to metamorphose and weave in and out. Now, and more than anything, I tell my students, I am 55 years old. I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, okay? But I'm looking for individuals to pass the baton to. There are things that Garrison and that Peter and that Chloe want to do, and I want to start lining up students that I can set off on their own journeys. So who is to lead now? We cannot have the gap. Chicanos cannot afford to have the gap that we had between the 70s and the 90s, because if we do that, then it's going to take us that much longer to get started, okay? There's a book by Richard, I think his name is, I'm pretty sure it's Richard Scarry, that he says Mexican Americans are the ambivalent minority. When I read that book, I was so angry because he called us ambivalent. But as Peter said, it's mañana. We need to take action. And the only way that we're going to get, we're not asking for anybody to give us anything. We just want the opportunity to earn it. And that's what the Movimiento's always said. I hope I didn't go over too much. I really appreciate you all listening.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our 3 speakers. Right now we're going to go and look at, or we're going to ask some questions really quick. So we're going to, I'm going to send the first one to Peter here. And I'm going to ask you from our student here, Melissa Hidalgo and Sierra Puente, what is the difference between Hispanic and Chicano? And also, did the Chicano movement help all Latino Americans or just Mexican Americans? So 2-part questions here. If you could kind of help break that down for us.
Sure. The word Hispanic comes up in the 1970s, and they're kind of related. The term Chicano is something that the Latino community, the Mexican American students or young adults come up with on their own in the 1960s and kind of inspires the movement. The Hispanic term comes up in the 1970s because that's when you actually start counting Hispanics or Latinos or Mexicanos or Puerto Ricanos or anything for a population census. And this is where it kind of plays into that second part of the question. Historically, Mexicanos, Puerto Ricans, you would see them legally considered white, although a lot of Puerto Ricans might have been considered black, right? It's just depended on kind of their skin color. It's hard to define what they were racially, and there were laws that allowed for people to be separated racially until you get to the mid-1960s, right? So you get to 1964, you have the Civil Rights Act, you have the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and once you get to that 1964-65 timeframe, then the Mexicano population says, hey, you know what? All this time, we've been fighting for rights based upon whiteness, right? Armando mentioned the American GI Forum. There's another group called the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. Both of them, when they place these legal strategies to fight for rights, especially for education and voting, they would argue we're white, we're legally white. Ever since 1848 with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we were considered white. Now, legally, they always had to fight for that claim because there's a lot of indigenous blood. So over and over again, you see court case after court case. And of course, the white population would say, well, it's impossible for us to be racist against you because you're legally white. So how can we discriminate against white people if we're white and you're white? So we start seeing this legal change of color to brownness. And this, so going to the second part of the question, in 1975, we extend this Voting Rights Act to cover people who are language minorities, people who speak now have the ability to claim minority status. So even if you don't speak Spanish, if you're Puerto Rican, if you're Dominican, if you're Mexican, if you're Central American, if you're South American, this movement will help you because the court cases that they bring forth and the pressure they put on politicians and Congress are going to push legislation that will benefit people of Spanish-speaking descent all across the country. So the answer to the second part of the question is absolutely this will help other Latin Americans, not just Chicanos. Chicanos were just the biggest group that we had in the United States and still have up to this point. And to go back to the Hispanic term, it's basically just a made-up word to count people of Mexico or Latin descent. And you notice, I don't think I said the word Hispanic much, and I don't think Armando says the word Hispanic. People who study Chicano history rarely use the word Hispanic. We may use the word Latino every now and then. When I wrote my dissertation and when I published articles, I usually use the word Mexican myself. But Hispanic is the word that is kind of made up just to count people who come from a Spanish-speaking background.
Thank you so much, Peter, for that. There are a couple more questions, but we're running out of time. So if you would like to please email some of those, if you had something that was not answered in this, please email the speakers. They would be happy, I know, to continue this discussion with you beyond. And please make sure to fill out the survey that is going to be on this Google Docs here, the survey here. Let us know you're here, get that attendance feedback, and give us feedback and get that attendance credit. Also, if you have not done so, register to vote by October 5. You can check to see if you're registered to vote I know my sister moved counties and thought she was going to be fine, and really she had to make sure to update that to be able to register to vote. So if there's anything like that and you think you're registered, double check to make sure you don't want to get to election day and not be able to participate. Please join us on our upcoming webinars this semester on October 23 and November 13. Mark your calendars. And again, please email our participants if you had any questions that might not have been answered here. Thank you so much again. Have a great day, and I hope to see you all again in our future events. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everybody. It was great.
All right, bye guys.
Bye-bye.